Simcha, celebration, Simcha, Simcha, celebration of life.
Hi and welcome to Simcha, a celebration of life. I'm your host, Aaron Halevi. Today we continue with our mini-series, Heritage Travels with Hugh Raichlin. Mumbai is home to the majority of India's rapidly dwindling Jewish population. At its peak in the late 1940s, the Jewish population of Mumbai reached nearly 30,000 individuals. Hugh explores the history of the Jewish community in India.
The first group of Jews to come to India were the Bnei Israel, literally meaning the children of Israel, and they came to India in 175 before the Common Era. Legend has it that they were sent there by King Solomon to look for treasures that would be used in the temple in Jerusalem, and they were blown off course on their boat that they were traveling and landed on the Konkan coast of India. The remarkable thing is that this group of Bnei Israel, which grew to a population of about 20,000 at its height, retained their Jewishness over 2 millennia in India, virtually isolated from the rest of the Jewish world. They were known as the Shanwar Telis, and what that means is the Sabbath oilmen or the Saturday oilmen, because they were known not to work on the Sabbath. They kept the Jewish dietary laws, they also kept circumcision, and they kept the festival of Passover. But what's interesting is because they came to India before the Common Era, they were unaware of the destruction of the temple by the Romans in the year 70 of the Common Era, as a result of which they did not keep the festival of Tisha B'Av, which is the fast where Jews commemorate the destruction of our second temple. So they were cut off from certain historic events, but yet, despite having been cut off, they retained their Jewishness. And in 1964, the Chief Rabbinate of Israel recognized the Bnei Israel as Jews in every respect. The second group to come to India, the second group of Jews, were the Jews from the Middle East, and they were known as the Baghdadi Jews. They dressed in Arabic-style clothing, and they spoke Arabic. And later on, when India was colonized by the British, the Baghdadi Jews at that stage had English passports because they were under Her Majesty the Queen in England, and they would also speak English in India. The third group of Jews were the Jews from Cochin, which is a town in India. And the first Jews came there from Spain in 370 of the Common Era. There was a further migration from various countries in about 500 of the Common Era. And then between the 16th and 18th century, there was a further migration into Cochin of Jews that came mainly from the Middle East. In 1968, the late Prime Minister of India, Indira Gandhi, came to the Paradeshi synagogue in Cochin, and she paid tribute to the Jews of Cochin for their enormous contribution to India. In fact, there were many Jews that held senior posts in government and in many areas of civic life in the defense force, and were recognized by Indira Gandhi for their tremendous contribution. I think what must be said is the tremendous tolerance of the Indian people, and it's not only in present day, but throughout history. The Indian people have been wonderful hosts to all people from all over the world that have come into India. And in fact, you even see that tolerance when you are in the streets of India, because you don't see any road rage, and there are human beings, animals, and all sorts of variety of vehicles traversing the roads, and nobody seems to lose their cool, and everybody just gives everybody else space to live. When we went to Mumbai, we visited the Magen David synagogue in Baikula, which is a beautiful blue tall structure that has been very well preserved, and that was the synagogue of the Baghdadi Jews. One of the members of our group was a man by the name of Solomon, whose family lived in India, and he remembers going to that synagogue when he was a young boy. And it was so beautiful to hear him singing in that synagogue and recalling the beautiful way of life that the Baghdadi Jews had and the way that they lived in Mumbai. We also went to the synagogue of Shar HaShamayim in Mumbai, and that is the synagogue of the Bnei Israel. And they are presently doing renovations to the synagogue. And it was also wonderful to see how that ancient community that has been in the country for 2,000 years still live in India. They speak Marathi, and we saw prayer books written with Hebrew on the one page and Marathi on the other side. We spent a wonderful Sabbath in a place called Pushkar, which was up in the mountains in the north of India, where there is a Chabad house. Chabad is a group of Jewish people that are from the Lubavitch movement, and they run guest houses and synagogues all over the world. And we went to one that is in Pushkar, where you find a lot of Israeli youth that finish the army. They come through India on a journey of self-discovery to see what is out there in the world and to see what the world has to offer. And India is one of those places which is a very spiritual place where a lot of Jews come to uncover some of those spiritual mysteries of the East. And it was so beautiful the way we all assembled in the synagogue on the Friday night and again on the Saturday morning, and were surrounded with Jews from all over the world, and many of them young Israelis. And for many of them, to have a traditional Sabbath happened in the unlikely place of India, because many of them had come from assimilated or non-religious homes, and their first true experience of an Orthodox Sabbath happened for them far away from Israel in India. There was also a very strong Jewish community in Calcutta, and the Baghdadi Jews had a major influence in Calcutta, and in fact contributed a great deal to the economy and to the infrastructure of Calcutta. That was the Sassoon family from Baghdad that were there for several centuries and made an enormous contribution. Today there are very few Jews in Calcutta. There are very, very few Jews in Cochin. There is a small group of Baghdadi Jews in Mumbai, and the largest group in Mumbai would be the Bnei Israel. The entire Jewish population today of India is probably less than 5,000 souls, compared to the almost 80,000 Jews that today are the Indian Jewish community of Israel. There's a fascinating connection between India and Jews and South Africa. There was a man that lived in South Africa in the mid-20th century by the name of Herman Kallenbach, who was a Jew of German Jewish descent. And he was an architect and a very successful man. And he befriended Mahatma Gandhi, who we know was famous throughout the world. He was an attorney, a lawyer in South Africa, and he started the movement of peaceful resistance, non-violent resistance. And Herman Kallenbach became very, very friendly with Mahatma Gandhi. And in fact, at a certain point, Mahatma Gandhi left his family and moved in with Mr. Herman Kallenbach, and Herman Kallenbach gave Gandhi his farm, which they called Tolstoy Farm, after Leo Tolstoy, the great Russian, because Gandhi was impressed with Tolstoy's philosophy of life. When Herman Kallenbach died, he in fact left Tolstoy Farm to Gandhi and to the followers of Gandhi, and in fact he left a large amount of money to the Indian community of South Africa, and also left a large part of his estate to Israel, to the Hebrew University, because he was a great Zionist.
Founded in 1998, the South African Jewish Report is an independent weekly publication and the only national Jewish newspaper in South Africa. With both a print and online presence, the readers include the majority of South African Jewry across the broad political and religious spectrum, as well as people from many other faiths and ethnic groups around the world.
The Jewish Report is a weekly newspaper. It's the only national Jewish publication. We cover a lot of what goes on in Gauteng, because that's where a large percentage of our readership is. But apparently we read in tiny towns too, so you know, someone in Klerksdorp apparently gets sent the Jewish Report, and it is quite widespread. And I think in smaller communities where there are not many Jews, for them, the Jewish Report's really like a connection to, you know, back to home or back to a sense of belonging to a community. We try and have some news-related items, and so we try and have a bit of interesting news. We also have some international news. We don't break the news because it's a weekly, but we try and have good analytical content. Since the beginning, this paper's had a back page of sports. We have Jack Milner, who usually writes those pieces for us, and it'll be about Jewish sports stars, local, or Israeli sport, and those are some of our regulars. Then I do an editorial every week. Sometimes it's a comment on the news, and sometimes it's a general piece. Our former editor, Jeff Sifrin, writes the weekly column. We have freelance writers, we have usual contributors, and somehow we never know how we're going to fill the 16 pages, but every week somehow it comes together.
Every Tuesday morning we have an editorial meeting first thing, and Sharon has made a list of all the stories that have come up, all the story ideas that come from all of us, and we allocate them to the various writers. And then we go out and do the jobs. Sometimes they've got to be done on the same day as going to press. Sometimes they hold over for a week. But we've also got regular features like the Pasha from the rabbis and that sort of thing. And we've got letters. We get a lot of letters.
I've been doing the last about 20 years. So when I come in the mornings, I'm given a pagination. I'm told which adverts, which articles go onto which page. So once they're proofread and subbed, they're put into a folder on the server. I then go to that page, place the adverts first, leave me the place I have to work with for the articles. I place the articles and the pictures in the best way possible, with the best graphic effect and the way they look the best, and most amount of copy available in the space provided to me.
The paper deadline is usually about lunchtime to early afternoon on a Wednesday. And it goes to the printers that night, Caxton, and it comes out Thursday, and we hear that people like to read it on Shabbat, and it's the Shabbos read, so by Friday people are hopefully absorbing the news, and over the weekend. We have a web presence too, and we try and update that daily with new stories.
The online version of any newspaper website differs in that the online version will have a younger profile. The stories will be longer because you're not limited by the paper and ink problems that you are in print. And most importantly, in terms of the South African Jewish Report, we get over a third of our people who log onto the website coming from overseas, largely from the 5 countries where South African Jews have emigrated to. And the amazing difference between print and online is that in online you can see how many people read the stories, when they read it, how long they looked at it for, etc., etc., etc. So you get so much information about people: who's new, who's been here before, where they come from, what devices do they use. I've seen over the last 3 years since we started planning and the developing and building of this current site, I've seen the percentage of mobile users treble. So where the first website I developed, you built it for PC and you kind of made it work in a mobile environment. Today you design a website for the mobile environment and you adapt it to PCs.
Our website has a lot of categories. It also is an archive of everything that's been in the paper. We have a latest page, which is the latest news. We have Israel tab, South Africa tab, blogs for people who write for both the paper and for the website only. And sometimes we'll put up press releases when we don't, sometimes the story is shorter, then we'll put up more coverage and more photos on the website. Our paper is free. You can pick it up. You can pick it up at exclusive books if you want to. If you know, for some people who want it delivered to their home, you can pay for it. It is quite costly. So, from a business model, paid subscriptions was not considered an option or has not been yet, and we make money from advertising.
I think because we're such a niche newspaper, I think that, and the editorial content is really fantastic. I think that it doesn't necessarily matter in terms of what page or where they appear in the paper, because the paper is being read from cover to cover. I think where my role comes in is to make sure that the message is the correct message, that they are not like advertisers aren't offending anyone by their content, and being mindful of the community that they are advertising within. So it's less important whether, I mean, it's always nice being on the front page. However, it's not the most important. I think that advertisers' messages are more important than where they are positioned within the paper. Although you still get the advertisers that only want to be on page 3 or 5, or the front or the back, and we try to accommodate where possible.
We are a newspaper that we sort of hold on to that idea of journalism, that we're not going to be swayed to cover certain things or not. And as editor, I'm always striking a balance between what's of news interest and what's of benefit to the community to know, because sometimes there are things that happen in our community that would be, you know, Sunday Times scandal coverage worthy, but you know, do we want to do that because we have a community responsibility? So we try and toe a balance of you know, covering the news, being good journalists, but also serving the community's interests.
Understanding the different cuts of kosher meat and how to prepare them is often a daunting task, believe me. Today, Ian and Sharon Lurie of Nussbaum Butchery chat to us about the well-known prime rib cut and the lesser-known raisin rib cut. B'tei avon.
I was actually in the textile industry, and my late father got to a point where he didn't feel he needed the pressures or the responsibility, and asked me if I would be interested in joining the business. And at that time, it was just right for me, and I joined the business, and the rest is now history. I started off cutting bones, packing parcels, all the menial jobs, which at the beginning I didn't understand. I thought I'd come to run the business with my father, but not fortunately, my father explained that you can't run a business if you don't know how to pack bones. So you need to be able to do whatever your staff are doing, and that way you become a more effective leader, I suppose. This is the prime rib, our most superior cut in the forequarter. The prime rib can be either on the bone or off the bone. Off the bone, it's a Scotch fillet. On the bone, it's called the prime rib. It can be used for grilling or roasting. And as you can see at the back, we have the ribs. This is the steakhouse beef ribs, which we then debone. Once we've taken off the Scotch fillet and we've left with the bones, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you how we cut the beef ribs, which steakhouses present so beautifully. This is the steakhouse beef rib. Generally, should be par-cooked, par-boiled, and then marinated, either roasted
or on the grill or on the braai. It's a particularly tasty meat because meat closer to the bone is always tastier. Having said that, the bone and the meat content are roughly 50-50. So there isn't a hell of a lot of meat on a rib. That's why generally people could have one rack, sometimes even two racks, because the meat between is particularly tasty and very enjoyable. As you can see, the steakhouse beef ribs, the prime rib, has 7 ribs. Now, in kosher, we have 10 ribs. What happened to the other 3 ribs? The other 3 ribs we call the second rib. And what it is, here are the other 3 ribs. So the prime rib fits over here, and this we call the second rib, which off the bone is the raisin rib. On the bone, it's called the chuck. Deboning the raisin rib is quite an intricate job, as you have little bones which you have to cut round to be able to get the raisin rib off the bone. The raisin rib is particularly tender, particularly tasty, doesn't need to be aged at all, and is particularly good when cubed for a curry. It's a very, very enjoyable and underrated cut.
This is a raisin rib, a very, very popular cut because it is wonderful for low and slow cooking. What I like to do with this piece of meat is, obviously wash it, pat it dry nicely, and then I brown it a little in either in a frying pan or on the top of a pot or inside a pot or whatever, and then take it out, and then I cover it with something like a nice glaze, like tomato, a tomato jam, chutney, a little bit of tomato sauce. You could put a little bit of red wine in it, but it needs to be saucy. As I said, it likes a long, hot soak in the bath. You stick it in your oven, you don't worry about it, and you'll have a beautiful raisin rib with a lovely glaze. And when you're ready to serve, out it comes. I mean, there's also another very, very easy recipe which works so well with the raisin rib. In fact, it's sometimes my family's favorite. All it is, half a packet of tomato soup, 1 packet of onion soup, and 500 mils of Coke. For about this size, I'd use about 2-3 cups of Coke, and you just let it go, low and slow, and it just becomes a beautiful gravy. Easy, simple as that.
Pirkei Avot, or Ethics of Our Fathers, is a compilation of ethical teachings and maxims. In chapter 5, verse 12, it is said, "There are 4 types of student. One who is quick to understand and quick to forget, his flaw cancels his virtue. One who is slow to understand and slow to forget, his virtue cancels his flaw. One who is quick to understand and slow to forget, he is a good portion. One who is slow to understand and quick to forget, he is a bad portion." That's all we have for this week's episode of Simcha, a celebration of life. As always, we'd love to hear from you, so please send us a message on Facebook at Spirit Sister Productions. From me, Aaron Halevi, and the Simcha team, Shavua Tov.